Awesome. So welcome to our part 2 of this series. We are here again talking about faith and disability with our panel tonight. Our part 1 was the family perspective, and that was recorded, and you are welcome to contact us and get that recording, or it will soon be posted on our website under the Family to Family Network page or our Facebook page, and I'll post that information in our chat. So if you would like to see part 1 from the family perspective, you're welcome to contact us or find that recording to get that information. Again, you're with the Family to Family Network here tonight. This one is hosted by our Davis County Family to Family Network. We have 12 networks across the state, from Cache County down to Washington County, over into Tooele, into the Basin. So that's both in Uintah County and in, let's call it Uintah County because my mind just went blank. That's awesome. So you can find more information about us. We are families helping families with all sorts of information, especially for those who are on the waiting list or in services with the Division of Services for People with Disabilities. Although that includes about 27,000 people in our state, and everyone is welcome to all of our activities and our workshops, which right now are being conducted, like tonight, by Zoom. We hope to soon be in person again as things start opening again in our state by counties. So thank you for being here tonight. We are very excited for this part 2. Again, this is Faith and Disability with our panel tonight, and I'm going to have Maria now do our introductions and take it away for the rest of our evening here tonight. Thanks, Maria, and to those who are here tonight.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, thank you for participating. We're excited to have a good discussion tonight. So my name's Maria Wiscombe. I work for the Utah Parent Center. The Family to Family Network is a project under the Utah Parent Center. But I also have a daughter who is a young adult that has disabilities and has DSPD services and requires some support to be successful in different settings. So I live the dream with everybody that's participating as well. So we've reached out to 4 different faith leaders in Utah, and they have graciously accepted our invitation to participate on the panel tonight. And we're all kind of going in blind in a way. We did share the questions that we have gathered from parents. The top concerns that we have heard from parents is they try to have their children, youth, young adults participate in their faith settings. And so we really appreciate their willingness to participate tonight. So I will introduce each one of them by name and then let them take a minute or two to introduce themselves and how they are connected to this wonderful disability world and with their faith as well. So Carol Ruddell, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Julia. It's great to see you all. My name is Carol Ruddell, and I'm a member of the Catholic Church here in Utah. I currently serve as a member of a volunteer commission that sits in an advisory capacity with our bishop, Bishop Oscar Solis. The commission is pretty small, as I said, it's volunteers, but my experience is definitely the arena of disabilities. I've been a teacher, I've run federal grants, I'm currently at the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. So I've got a broad background in disability and really try to be sure that everyone who wants to be included, wants to belong, wants to be a part of the Catholic faith has an opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Carol. All right, John Weaver.
I'm John. I currently work for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm a principal at a little seminary adjacent to the Dan Peterson School, which is kind of a magnet school. All of our students would be categorized as severe or profound, and been doing that for 4 years. Had another 3-year experience at a sister school, Jordan Valley in Salt Lake City. served for 10 years as the disabilities advisor for seminaries and institutes worldwide. I'm going to say have some interesting family experience, multi-generational. And currently I'm serving as on the Disabilities Advisory Committee for the church. I also, from the ecclesiastic end, I served as a bishop in an inner city ward for a number of years, and we had gained lots of experience there.
Great, thank you. And then Austin Porter.
Yeah, so I'm Austin, and I currently serve as a hospice chaplain for a local hospice agency kind of in Davis County. But I've also served on staff at Mountain Road Church in Fruit Heights, which is a evangelical Presbyterian church, and as well as serving on churches in a couple states like Colorado and California and Kansas. And really what I love about these conversations is, so I was able to attend the first parent meeting, and it was so helpful for me because I don't have a child with a disability. You may hear I have a 14-month-old, and you may hear his voice at times, but I'm in many ways coming in blind as someone who really longs to have a faith community and faith space for parents and children to worship in. And yet I also get to learn from you guys. And so I have experience with some ministries, as we would call them, directed towards people with disabilities. But I'm also here just to learn from my fellow panelists and the parents too. And I'm honored to be here.
Thank you, Austin. All right, Rabbi Sam Spector.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm the rabbi of Congregation Kol Ami. We're the largest synagogue in the state of Utah. And Kol Ami means all my people. And so in order to reflect that, our name, I think we need to be inclusive of everybody, regardless of their abilities. And so I'm not on any panel groups or anything like some of the other folks will be talking tonight, but I do have some experience on this issue that I'm excited to share with you all, and also give my faith perspective. And so we have about 130 or so students in our religious school, and a lot of those students do have varying abilities, different backgrounds, and in particular, the progressive Jewish community, by that I mean like Reform and Conservative Jews, tend to have children later in life than really any other religious demographic in the United States. And so, we do see a lot of children with autism, on the autism spectrum, and with Down syndrome in our community, and being able to make sure that we give those children quality education, empower them to be leaders, and see holiness in them is very much an important part of what we do.
Well, thank you. I love this because I love the fact that we've got faith leaders who have served on different levels, and different sizes of congregations, different arenas. So I think this is going to be awesome and bring some great perspectives to the table for parents. So, and the nice thing too, tonight, we are recording it. And so it will hopefully be used as a resource for a lot of other faith leaders and families to share with their faith leaders. So we're excited about that. All right. So I'm going to pose the first question to our panel. And again, if you have questions that you would like to ask, please put them in the chat box and we will have the panel address them as well. So the first question I think is pretty broad, so you can answer it probably in just about any way. What has worked for you to support a person with a disability and their family in your congregation? And then maybe keep in the back of your mind this a little sub question that goes along with it. And tonight we actually just have two main questions. So I know we can have a lot of discussion on these. The sub question would be, how do you promote inclusion in different parts of your faith in your congregation, such as in rituals, in ceremonies, in classroom settings, etc.? So we have someone that wants to take the mic first.
I'm always happy to be brave.
Do it. Thank you.
Unless there's somebody else who wants to go first.
You go for it. Thank you.
So I'm actually going to share an experience that I'm currently in. So it's exciting for me to be able to talk about something while I'm learning. So little side note, something that I've been involved with in the last couple of years is being an ally to people of color that have been discriminated against in communities that have been marginalized, and same with the LGBTQ community and other communities. And these aren't communities that I'm a part of myself. And an important part of that for me in recognizing how to be an ally is recognizing that I truly don't know. I can be empathetic and sympathetic, but that I truly don't know what it's like to be in those people's shoes. And the same thing is I've found true with folks who have various disabilities. And currently I'm going to tell you about a girl that I'm currently working with. I've been at Colamy for 3 years. In my first week there, I was walking through the religious school and I saw this little girl crying. And she was a Chinese little girl, and she had been adopted from China. She's about 10 years old, and she is completely deaf. And through American Sign, I asked her why she was crying, and through American Sign Language, she told me through her mom that she was upset because every child would have a bat mitzvah except for her, and that she wanted a bat mitzvah more than anything, but she wouldn't get to have one because she's deaf. And so I promised her that she would have, bat mitzvah ceremony like all the other kids would too. And her bat mitzvah is this summer. It's been a few years now, and so I'm very excited. And I figured, working with her in the traditional way of getting her to learn the blessings and stuff like that, and read the prayers and such wouldn't work, as she's not particularly verbal, communicates, like I said, mainly through American Sign Language. And so I started tutoring her one-on-one and figured, hey, she can just, with my conception of what it meant to be deaf, I was like, this will be easy. We'll just take the prayer, you will look at the translation of it, and then you'll sign for us the translation, easy peasy. And it was not resonating, and it wasn't making sense. And I was like, why is this so hard? Why can't you just sign the translation? And what I came to realize, her mom explained to me that, look, people who are deaf process differently than people who hear. And this is like, you're trying to teach her in the way that you process things, and that doesn't work for her. And so what I would say is, what I learned through this in the way to help this family was being able to recognize that I couldn't help this family, but maybe there were others who could. And so swallowing my own pride of saying, hey, Rabbi Spector doesn't have all the answers, but maybe there's another rabbi who does. And I looked, and in Illinois, there is a woman named Rebecca Dubois who is a deaf rabbi who teaches, who leads services through American Sign Language for people across the country over Zoom. And I enlisted her help, and she's been tutoring this girl, and this girl has now found she never really connected with her Jewish identity. She connected with her Chinese identity and her deaf identity, but didn't really find a place for herself in Judaism. And she now tunes in every single Friday night to that rabbi's Shabbat service in American Sign Language. Highlight of her week is studying for her bat mitzvah. And rather than, again, my solution was, for your bat mitzvah speech, you can write out a speech and then you can sign it to us and an interpreter will translate it. And this rabbi said, Maxime, why don't you make for us she's this amazingly talented painter. She said, why don't you paint what you want to teach us and then explain about your painting? And so to make a long story short, how I learned to help this family was recognizing that as an ally, but not somebody with that challenge, I couldn't project how I learn and process onto a person who learns differently than me. And I needed to go outside and find the right resources and put that effort forward. And in doing so, I was able to find somebody who could meet this student at her level. And, ultimately I need to ask myself, what's the ultimate goal here? Is the ultimate goal that she's going to tune into my service and hear, um, listen to my sermon, or have her mom sign my sermon, and that I'm going to be her rabbi and all these things? Or is my goal to engage her in Judaism? And if there's somebody who's able to do that better and more appropriately than me, then I've done my job.
Perfect example. Thank you.
I'm going to say, if I could just chime in briefly, I think Rabbi Spector touches on such an important point here, and that is, we all come to the table with our own set of experiences, and the world is far larger than any one person can experience it all. And in order to create that understanding between individuals and to identify needs and to help and assist, there has to be exposure. And we need to be willing to allow ourselves to be exposed to different ideas, to different communities, to different circumstances. And then with that understanding that we gain from that exposure comes the belonging. In my experience, there was just as an example, we had a young man move in to our community, and he was 18. He was on his own in a wheelchair, and his parents basically said, "You're 18. You need to be on your own. You need to just hit life head on, and we're not going to do everything for you." So a very brave move on everyone's part, and so he came and started participating with us and in our activities. And suddenly the question became, well, we'd planned to do this, so how do we get him involved? How can he participate? And it wasn't so much about disability, it was about the individual. Say, how can we get, say Frank to engage and to be a part of the activities we're doing? How can we get him to feel that sense of belonging? One Sabbath meeting, it was a fast and testimony meeting. He leaned over. We would sit next to him, and he leaned over and he said, "I want to get up and share some things." He said, "But I can't because there's no ramp. There's just these steps that go up to the front, and then the podium and the microphone." And I said, "How do I do that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Let's figure it out." And so we came up with the idea that he could wheel to the front and I could go with him, and then he'd put his arm around my neck and I'd grab him around the back by the belt and hoist him up, and we went up the steps together and took him to the front, and he was able to participate in a way, but of course made sure that he was comfortable with that. But it was a wonderful experience, and I think it changed a lot of people in terms of preconceptions as to what people can and can't do, and what's important and what isn't so important. And it was abundantly clear that that young man was more important than anything else that was going on at that time. And he just stood out just as a beacon, and he had an opportunity to express his faith and his belief in a way that he wanted to. And it really didn't take that much. But unless you knew him, and unless you had built that relationship and that rapport, that never would have materialized the way that it did. So again, as faith leaders, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we're ever reticent to engage, or we feel like, gee, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. That's not an acceptable approach. But to just dive in and focus on the individual and their desires, their needs, their contributions, and don't make it about disability. just make it about people.
And I love these two examples because the thing that stands out to me with both of them is that you either approach the individual with the disability or the family to see what they wanted, or to get more information so that you could approach it in an appropriate way. And so you brought them into it as well. So you didn't just assume and act on your assumptions, but you got personal and talked with them to get their input. So I really like that because I think there's so much to that. Carol, Austin, either one of you have something to add? I know you do.
I'll chime in. I have had very similar experiences to the two stories, but can I take a little different tactic? Not that I couldn't come up with a story for those, but one of the things I think in the Catholic Church is we're pretty much an institution. We have in the state of Utah is our diocese, so we have a bishop who's over everyone. We have about 50 parishes and missions across the state, and each of those pretty much are their own. They follow the teachings of the Pope, the Catholic faith, and the bishop's direction. But in reality, it's the pastor who calls me and says, Carol, I don't know what to do. I've got a deaf kid. That's a classic one since I'm actually an interpreter and do deaf ministry. Or I've got this child, I just don't know what to do. Or can you come down and teach him? That's always the one I love because it's like, well, I actually have my own parish, and my own church. But I think there has to be a sense from the top and top and bottom should be reversed in my opinion, but that's okay. You know what I mean? There has to be a message that the church is open and welcoming and wants everyone to participate. There has to be a message of relationships. There has to be a message of, well, you got a challenge. Let's brainstorm how we can figure this out. Who are we including in the conversation? Because of course, like you all, I'd be like the parent, the child, the young adult, whoever it is, as a part of that conversation. But if I don't have some expectation placed on pastors or religious educators that everyone is welcome, everyone is included, everyone has a place, everyone has something to contribute. We're all not takers. We don't do for people. Everyone participates and is a giver. So I think it goes both ways. I think we have to have open hearts and open minds and listen and engage in a relationship and a conversation. But I also believe that the leaders of the faith have to have that expectation that that is what will happen. So I think it goes both ways. So.
Yeah.
I love that. Austin.
Yeah, so one thing that really struck out to me from the parent perspective conversation was kind of the idea of doing something for or doing something with, a child or family member with a disability. And really, I can think of specific stories, but just in my experience working with particularly kids or youth with disabilities, that's so true. Including them in the service, including them in a lesson or in a group or in a service opportunity, rather than merely trying to, give them a gift, for example. I think that's been really awesome. And another thing, just as I was thinking about this, just from a real practical perspective, for tools maybe faith leaders can give to parents, because I think that's also hopefully what we can impart with this a little bit is I was on staff at a church in Colorado, and they had a program that was called Recess. And this was a generally Christian-based program, but it's not necessarily religious. But they do have a faith component if you want to include that in it. And it's around the nation. There's not one in Utah yet. My wife and I have actually worked on starting one, and hopefully we can do that. But what this program did is it provided essentially a recess night for families with children with disability, as well as their siblings, as well as the parents if they wanted that. And so what we would do is we'd host it. It would be monthly, And sometimes we do it more monthly, but typically with one thing as faith leaders we run into is getting volunteers to help out often can be difficult, but we would do a monthly night, and it was a Friday night. It would be for about 4 hours, and we would host a dinner, and we would host age appropriate games and activities for both the child or children with a disability, as well as their siblings. And the siblings could help be volunteers and leaders if they felt, comfortable and wanted to be with their sibling, or they could go off and play with their friends, for a couple hours. And we would also have classes for the parents if they were interested. But we also said, if you guys need to, one parent, we'd always say, what'd you guys do with your time? And one of the times it was, I went to All a Dollar and got birthday supplies. I've been trying to do this forever, and this is the only time I could do this. And, so it was just a joy for us to provide a little space. And what we found is most of the families who came to this program weren't a part of our church. Many, there was a significant array of faiths and beliefs represented. And yet what it did is it brought, similar to the Family to Family Network, it just brought really great connections. And then we would host, certain seasons like Christmas, especially, parties where the parents would go and be treated as adults, and they could talk. And yet we were watching the kids, we were watching the siblings. And we also made sure to have occupational therapists on hand, at least one medical doctor and some nurses, just to help with any emergencies that may arise. But practically, as I'm thinking about just particularly in Utah, a program like that, one thing that would be kind of on my heart is, so the congregation I'm a part of is quite small, probably has about 40 to 50 members. And so hosting something like that wouldn't be possible. And yet I've thought many times, how about I go to the ward down the road, or the Catholic church, town over, and maybe what we could do is host it. And it doesn't have to be a faith specific event, but it is just a place where maybe there's an occupational therapist in one congregation that has a heart to do this, and we can connect with each other and really have these networks. And the other thing too that I've just found is, as someone who doesn't have a child with disabilities, I have family members, but it is different when it's your child, is I don't know what I don't know. And I just have loved when parents have been really open and honest with me, and help me understand where they're coming from, as well as I think they've appreciated what I just said. I really am not quite sure how to do this, but give me the best advice, and we'll do what we can. And then also taking some training classes. And the last piece I want to bring out is practical. It may not apply to your faith tradition, but I think it can be applied in different ways. Is one thing I've seen is, so our church does what we call communion, or it's also known as Eucharist or the sacrament. And one thing we've done, and we do this with children or people with disabilities, as well as young children. And when we take the elements of the bread and the juice or the water, what we've done is if someone hasn't been able necessarily they don't understand exactly what's going on, or if the child's too young to hold the glass of juice in their hands that's spilling all over their dress, we'll give them a piece of bread and we'll give them a grape. And then we've asked the parents and say, while we're going through this, use this as a teaching tool to kind of explain to your children what is going on and the significance of why we're doing this. And so that can be applied in different situations of what tools can we provide throughout the service to allow parents and the leaders of classes to say, hey, this is what's going on, and use those as a teaching tool. But yeah, that's kind of some ideas I had.
I love that. Thanks, Austin. All right, so I have a thought that came to my mind. I'm trying to suppress it until our next question. So I did jot down some notes. But there was a question in the chat box, and if whoever feels like they want to answer it would be awesome. But how can parents help others of your faith, or I kind of take this as a parent perspective. How can parents help others in their faith have high expectations of our children or anyone with disabilities. She said some families are great at advocating for their children and youth, but some are not and would not even know where to begin, what to ask for. But I found that, same with my daughter, is that some people just, I don't know, they just want to be nice and good and do for, and kind of miss the opportunity of doing with. And that was kind of my note that I was going to go on, but I'm going to hold off still. But how can we help encourage others to have high expectations?
If I can chime in, I think one thing that a lot of times people struggle with when they see disability is they only see the dis and not the ability. And I think that anyone who's engaged in this arena really needs to approach it with a focus of ability, capacity, worth, value, to be a talent scout, if you will. I mean, in our faith, we believe every child of God is absolutely unique and priceless in God's eyes. And I have felt for a long time like the spiritual health of a community can in large part be measured by how we treat those in our midst who might be vulnerable or who might need additional assistance. If we're responsive and we're compassionate and we're working with one another, again, with, not to or for, but drawing in the whole group, that's where the magic happens. And that's where miraculous things kind of shine forth, and where we can begin to get that little taste of heaven here on earth. So being that talent scout, as a parent, you would know what your child brings to the table. And every person has a gift to share. No matter how deeply buried under disability it might be, it's still there. And discovering and promoting and leveraging that gift or that talent or that ability or abilities is crucial. So you don't want your ward or your congregation to be focusing on the negative or the disability or the challenge. It's much more edifying for all involved to focus on the ability, the contribution, the gift that they bring to everyone else. And so that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is every religious tradition and every religious faith has its mile markers, its rites of passage, very frequently tied to age. And I think that as a parent, if you approach it with the assumption that my child at that age or at that stage or at that juncture is going to participate like everyone else does, and approach your faith leaders with that expectation to say, we are a family of faith and we want to participate, every member of our family. And according to age and our tradition, these are the things that we would be engaging in. So how would you like us to go about that? And how can we use the strengths and abilities of the people involved to make this a wonderful experience for everyone? So again, you need to self-advocate, but I would throw this caution out. Sometimes as parents, we need to be fierce advocates for our children and our loved ones. Out in the world, whether it's services that we're trying to acquire or supports or educational tracks or opportunities, sometimes we really need to be the mama bear. In faith communities, my observation has been is that rarely works. To come with a demand or I want to say a list of things that are going to be done But if you approach it just with a natural, normal expectation, as anyone would with anyone else, that here we are at this juncture, whether it's a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, or a baptism, or participation or ordination or whatever, then that conversation can begin in kind of a natural way, rather than coming in teeth bared. So I've been around long enough to see some wonderful things happen and to see some tragedies. And as I've viewed this over time, I've tried to put my finger on what are the key ingredients that lead to beautiful experiences. What are the principles involved that lead to just success stories, and a drawing together of everyone who is involved in that exchange or that experience. So talent scout for sure, focusing on ability, age appropriate participation, and then advocacy without the fierceness. Advocacy from a position of, I want to say, just pure desire. So those are some thoughts.
I really appreciate that. One of the things that we discussed in our part 1 of this little series was to do a better job as parents of introducing our children with their abilities, and not introduce them as, this is my child, she has this, they have this, but to introduce them, put that on the back burner, even though sometimes that's what people see first, is their disability, whether it's physical or, my daughter appears typical, but watch her for 15-30 seconds and you'll know that she's not on the same level as her age peers. And so I think that's something as parents that we can do a better job at too, is introducing them as who they really are inside. I really like that. I see Rabbi Spector.
Yeah, so there's this really, like, so you were talking about how do you get other people in your community, faith community, to appreciate people displaced. There's this phenomenal book. I love it. It's been bestseller for a long time. It's called The Bible, and in it, it's written by my favorite author, God. And so in it, we learn about some characters. First, there's this guy who has a stutter and says, because of my speech impediment, there's no way I could be, a leader at all. And his name was Moses. And then there was a guy also who was blind, and when he was giving out blessings, his name was Isaac. And then there was another guy who was blind, who took down an entire temple of Philistines named Samson. And there was a guy who walked with a limp because he had wrestled with an angel named Jacob. And there was a guy who was picked out to be king, and everybody laughed because they said, he can't be the king. He's the smallest guy in his community, and his name was David. And so when we look at the Bible, it's full of people who look different, who act different, who have maybe some different abilities and things that would appear to be disabilities. And yet those people are leaders. And God, there's a story outside of the Bible of God telling Moses, I'm choosing you because your voice is the most beautiful thing I've heard. I mean, so I think that's what we need to focus on, is if we're people of faith, then we need to open up that Bible and say, look, there are people in our faith who are incredible leaders. And if we see people discriminating against folks, just open up to Leviticus 19 and read that it says, this is what we call the holiness code in Judaism. We read this on Yom Kippur, our most holy day of the year. It says, do not mock the deaf, and do not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Do not defraud your fellow. These are the words we read on our most important day of the year, because we're supposed to see holiness in each other, and we're not and treating people with disabilities like it's less than is something we're not supposed to do. And I'll conclude by saying this. Is, I mean, just to also remind folks too, in the very first chapter of Genesis, it says we're all created in God's image and likeness. And it's kind of beautiful that each of us are different. It shows us how many layers there are to God, I think. But, I'll conclude with this. There's a Jewish joke. Well, we Jews always have jokes. There's a joke that, I'll ask my Catholic friend here. According to the Catholic Church, when does life begin? Is the stance of the Catholic Church? What would the Catholic Church say to that?
Conception.
Okay. So people ask me, when does life begin in Judaism? And like, when is it considered viable? And our answer is always acceptance to medical school. And so for us though, but that's the joke, is for us, we have this expectation, and this is something I've been harping on in our community. We have this expectation that our kids will become doctors and lawyers in the Jewish community, and not every kid is going to be a doctor and lawyer. And so the person who I teach about the most in the Bible of anyone that I like to every year give a big sermon about is Bitzalel. Bitzalel, and a lot of people are like, wait, who the heck's Bitzalel? Bitzalel was the guy who built the tabernacle. And according to, and the best arts college in Israel today is named the Bitzalel College of Art after him. And according to the Bible, so Bitzalel built the tabernacle, but there's a story in Judaism, we have what's called midrash, which are stories that are then about the blank spaces in the Bible, the questions we have. Like, so there's this question, well, why did Bitzalel build the temple? Why the tabernacle? Why didn't Moses build the tabernacle? He was the leader after all. He's the guy that God talked to. And according to this story, Moses actually tried to build the tabernacle, and he tried several times. And every time he did it, God said, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. And then Bitzalel said, let me give it a try. In the first attempt that he did, he got it perfectly. And God said, yes, that's it. And that through this, Moses learned that it's not all on him. Everybody in his community has different abilities and skill sets that maybe he doesn't have, that he can count on. And so I love teaching about Betzalel because, like I said, this girl who I'm working with for her bat mitzvah this summer, she can't hear anything. Her mom told me that her level of deafness is that if there was a jet engine plane going off next to her, she wouldn't hear it. And yet, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I failed second grade art because I have some learning disabilities, including because of some issues I had at birth, very poor fine motor skills. And so maybe I can talk and listen and do certain things, but this girl can be the Betzalel that I never could be. And there's a place for her in our community. That's what the Bible teaches us. So let's look for empowering people. Disabilities are people with disabilities are the biggest leaders in our Bible. And also we see that some of the unsung heroes of our Bible are people who don't have the most traditional abilities.
I love that. And there's a lot of comments in our chat box saying so many people can relate, and really helps us. I mean, you can take it on look at it through your personal lenses, or look at it on a religious level. So many ways to apply it. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to throw my comment in here. I can't wait any longer. Sorry, but I think it goes along here. So my daughter had a situation where something was done for her, and it was a surprise to her, a surprise to our family. And when I learned about it, it broke my heart, actually, because I felt like they totally missed the boat on being able to instead do it with her and learn more have the opportunity to learn more from her by doing it with her, learn more from her, about her, have her share her talents. and those sorts of things. But one of the things that I learned from that experience was that people do their best with what the information that they have. And so I really think that, those that did this for her really had best intentions, but they didn't have all the information that I felt like they needed. So that was my responsibility to make sure that people have that information. So as her parent, like John Weaver said, I'm not going to go attack and why did you not do this, and kind of lay down the law of what my law is. But it also helped me to be able to be more proactive and open. And I also now look for more opportunities for her to be a part of, whether or not people are totally comfortable with that. I mean, if I'm either there with her to support her, or I have someone that can support her and help her be successful in a situation, I'm going to try and provide her more opportunities to share what she has to share with other people. So I love that what everyone shared to this point, as far as there are so many lessons that we can learn from the beginning of time, throughout life. But we also can help others learn from our own children too. There are lessons to be learned, and not because they have a disability necessarily, maybe not, but everybody has something to give. And so I really like that. I'm a let's do it with them person, if you can't tell. All right, so Rabbi Spector, he mentioned real quick in the chat box that he forgot that there was a young man in his community who had some intellectual disabilities and wanted more than anything to grow up to be a welder. That's sweet.
Our Bitsalel.
Yeah.
As I said, that's one of the students I see as our biggest accomplishment. Not necessarily we have enough doctors and lawyers. That's awesome. And so giving those people the pat on the back, that's amazing.
Oh yeah. And we all know a little bit of validation goes a long way, and sometimes we just need that little bit of encouragement from a leader, from a faith leader, from a teacher, that is just exactly what the individual needs to give them that boost to move forward. All right, so any last comments before we move to the next question? We're good? All right, okay. So the next question I think goes hand in hand with what we've just been talking about, but what can we as a parent or a family member do to help you as faith leaders understand what our family needs? And then this really goes along with what we've been talking about. So also, how can parents approach or reach out to their faith leaders? So kind of answered this in ways, but I think we can continue to answer it at a deeper level.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. The first one is kind of first suggestion is something that I think parents and faith leaders really should all be doing, and it's just pray. Because I think the power there's real power in prayer, and pray for those opportunities, whether it's a parent or a faith leader, to have those conversations. Pray that they go well. Pray that both the faith leader has ears to hear, the parent has the words to say. Just lift those conversations, future conversations, up in prayer. And speaking as a faith leader, just there's an immense honor knowing that someone in my congregation may be praying for me, and likewise there's an immense honor for praying for someone in my congregation. I think prayer is really huge in all of this. Another thing is, and we've said this before, and it was even talked about in the first meeting, is just being honest with faith leaders, because while we have typically this higher theological training or whatever, we may not have the training that you guys do. We don't necessarily understand the disabilities like you guys do, who live it and see it and breathe it. And so for us, we may be able to, like Rabbi is saying, he can expound on these beautiful stories of, or even someone like from 2 Samuel, Mephibosheth. That's a fantastic story of the man who is disabled, and yet King David brings him to his table. And, you know, so maybe our role as faith leaders is to bring those beautiful stories to life. And yet one thing we hope for and pray for as parents can bring the beautiful stories of our Betzalels, of our Mephibosheths to light to us, so we can then learn how to include and how to, you know, do things with rather than for. I think obviously advocacy is great. And then also just for all of us, whether this is disability or really any topic, but just understand that unity is not uniformity. And so it doesn't have to look the same. You know, we don't all have to have the same understanding. We don't have to have the same abilities, but we can still be united in our faith, as well as, you know, our love for God and our love for each other, even if it looks different and even if it's uncomfortable at times. And I think that's just really key, is seeing the beauty of diversity. One thing I've recommended to a couple faith leaders is a book called Disability: Living into the Diversity of Christ's Body. And it's written from a pastor who, what he does is he has a child with disability, and he weaves together kind of this theological understanding of the value of how God uses disability, as well as practical advice of how do we help each other. So if you're looking for a resource, I think that may be helpful to even share with your faith leader. And I think the biggest thing about all of this is, even more than advocacy, it's the fact that there's hopefully real relationships going on with our faith leaders and with our you know, congregants. Because the reality is, as faith leaders, we are no holier, we are no more righteous. We just have a different role. And so we have the same struggles as everybody does. And yet when we're able to know each other, when we're able to have meals together and live life even outside of our faith communities, I think that's where the most beautiful advocacy happens, because it's not mama bear coming forward, but it's a sincere love of, I know this beautiful boy or girl or grown child, and I know their family. And that those moments, even outside of just the worship services, I think are one of the best ways that we can continue to just learn how to best support, you know, the community in our churches with disabilities. And I'm seeing someone asked for the title of the book real quick. It's called Disability: Living into the Diversity of Christ's Body. And it's by a man named Brian Brock. And I'll throw that in the chat too.
Awesome, thanks. I was going to try and type it in, but I'm not that fast. So this is funny, when you were talking about creating that relationship. So it totally took me back to Sunday when we were at church on time, ahead of schedule for the meeting, and our faith leader, our bishop, he has a very good relationship with our daughter, and he came up to her and started teasing her and getting her all riled up. And I'm like, okay, when you go up on that stand and she's not quiet, it's your fault. But we always get comments from people who might be listening on Zoom, and they said, oh, we heard your daughter, we miss seeing her, we miss hearing her. And that's always good to hear, because I don't miss, I like her to be quieter than she is. But it's nice to have that relationship with your leaders, because then it is a comfortable situation. Even if you may not be sitting comfortably with your child, yeah, it just makes it a little more comfortable for you to be there. All right, Carol.
So I was gonna, a long while ago, Jennifer put something in the chat about faith leaders often being busy with administrative things. And when I get a call, so what'll happen for me is somebody will want to have their child have one of those benchmarks John mentioned, like First Communion or confirmation in the Catholic Church. And they'll call the diocese, and then somebody at the diocese will say, oh, you need to talk to Carol, and they'll call me. And my first question has been, have you talked to your pastor? And they'll say, well, no, he's always so busy. And I said, yeah, catching him right after Mass is not a good time to grab him to have this lengthy conversation and make your request known. And so I often tell people, make an appointment. You know, pastors are usually willing to meet in the evenings or during the day. They'll adjust their schedules and be ready to tell your story. It's not uncommon that maybe some older siblings have gone through First Communion or confirmation, and then suddenly the younger sibling who has a disability, it's a benchmark. The parents want them to go through it. And pastors are fine with it. I don't think nobody's going to say no to a sacrament, right? I mean, it's Christ, it's God touching your life. It's grace. And, but they just don't quite know how to do it. And as a parent, that's what you bring. If your child has an IEP or IFSP or all of those plans, you know what works for your child. So bring that with you and have the conversation. Frequently, you know, all churches have curriculums that children go through, books, right? And I personally know someone in the Catholic Church who will hand the book to the parent and say, will you be your child's teacher? You're their first teacher anyway. It's like, and I've had quite a few conversations with those leaders, but I think the idea of being able to say what's really important. One is, first and foremost, it's a relationship with God, and it's a relationship with each other. You know, love thy neighbor, love thyself. You know, I mean, that is what we're called to do. And if we can bring relationships and growing those relationships, whether they're with God or with congregants, parishioners, whoever, to me, that's what's important. And being able to have a conversation with your pastor about, yeah, John may not totally get that host that you're passing out at communion is the body of Christ, because that's what we believe. But he knows it's not dinner. And fundamentally in the Catholic Church, that's the only question that has to be answered. Do they understand that it is unique? It is not dinner. If the child understands it's different, and I'll give you a beautiful example. Several years ago, we had several deaf children who were ready to make First Communion. And we had a group because it was, quite frankly, it was just easier to teach it directly than to use interpreters. The message was direct. And so not unlike what your experience is, Rabbi Spector. And so this young man had autism in addition to being deaf. Very little communication going on. He would express his satisfaction or dissatisfaction quite vocally, but nevertheless. And when it came down to the time we were preparing for First Communion, we were practicing with the hosts. And every time we would practice, he would take the host and he'd smell it, kind of lick it, and decide it was okay to consume it. And it's like, okay. So when it came down to about a couple of weeks before, the pastor asked me, as the teacher, is everybody ready to make First Communion? And I said, yes, I believe so. I believe they all understand that this is the body of Christ, that it's unique, it's special, it's not just dinner, right? But Father, you need to know what might happen with this young man. And I explained how he was doing it. And he said, that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. He knows it's different. If he has that tactile smell thing going on, I'm not worried about it. So we get to Mass, and I'm going to cry. Sorry. We get to Mass, and he's like fourth in line to make communion, and you come up with your parents and you receive it. And we practiced how to do it. And Father holds up the host and says, body of Christ, and I sign it. And the young man puts his hands out and he takes it and he consumes it. And he didn't smell it. He didn't taste it. He knew. And I bawled, of course, and had to get through 4 more kids. But nevertheless, you know, you never know how God's going to touch someone, whether it's in a way that they show you, a way that they tell you. had another experience, young man making confirmation, very, very involved, very severe disabilities. And, but he loved music. And so the teacher just made music and all the spirit songs be what they did every time they had class. And I happened to be down interpreting for that one too. And Bishop Wester was our bishop at the time. And I happened to be there with the mom and the teacher and all. And he says, is everybody ready? Are you confident? Can you speak to these children, young people's understanding? And the teacher said, yes, as long as we sing. She made it a priority that this young man's way of expressing his faith in the Holy Spirit was through song. And she made it a priority that that entire group would sing their responses during that Mass. So it's recognizing that every person receives and meets God in their own way. And how do we give them the opportunity to express that?
I love that. I mean, and whether or not you have a disability, we all approach God differently. Our religious, our spiritual experiences are very different from each other. Thank you very much.
You know, just touching that I'm touching on that idea of faith leaders being so busy. I can identify with that. You know, when I was serving as a bishop, I was a young father. I had 2 young girls. I had a newborn, and then during my service, we had another child. And you know, every Sunday, I'm up on the stand looking at my poor wife trying to corral the kids, and you know, working full time and just fixing water heaters and all the things that just are attendant to life. And the counsel that was given to have those open, sincere conversations is so important. When you're approached by someone who you can tell is just completely sincere and they're filled with good desire, you can sense that. And perhaps perhaps an appropriate place to have these conversations might be in your own home. And you know, there's nothing wrong with inviting your faith leader over for dinner and discussing family members and saying this, you know, making introductions and talking about talents and abilities and ways that people in your family can contribute. And again, as you create the exposure, that creates the relationship that will build into this sense of community, this sense of belonging. So just to share a quick story, I had a mother approach me. I was serving as a seminary principal, and her son was about to age out of the educational system at 22. And she approached me in tears and she said, what do we do with my son? We have a large family. Every member of our family has served a mission, and that's a huge part of our faith, and it's a very important part of, you know, development of youth, and it's who we are, right? So she was beside herself, not knowing what to do for her son. He was, you know, about 6'4", recumbent in a chair, would probably never leave that chair in this life. He had some verbal abilities, but it took a little while to attune your ear to his speech patterns. But once you did, you were right there with him. And we started talking about his ability to contribute. What could he do? What service could he provide? And this young man was just absolutely gregarious and enthusiastic about everything. And, you know, we would sing in class and he was just at the top of his lungs, totally off key, and no one cared. And it was just great. So as we talked together, we decided that perhaps his mission could be serving at another seminary to greet his peers, to let some of his enthusiasm and that excitement about his faith rub off. So we made arrangements and it all worked out, and a family member would take him to the seminary in the morning, and they'd spend the morning there for about 2 classes worth. and he would greet people as they came in and, welcome them enthusiastically and want to shake their hands. Then he'd go into a different class every day and participate in their devotional and sing at the top of his lungs, totally off key. And it turned into the most amazing thing. The principal of that seminary told me at the end of the school year, he said, "You have no idea how many lives that young man changed." He brought a spirit with him that was so wholesome and so good that it just dripped everywhere and it got all over everyone, and it was perfect. There were a number of young men who said, "You know what? This young man has been such an inspiration to me. I was completely fearful of ever even thinking I could serve a mission. But when I saw that he could do it and that he made such a huge difference, even in little things, that I decided I could do it." And again, this idea that everyone has something to contribute. And if we have these conversations honestly and express our sincere desires, then it's surprising what kinds of solutions you can come up with that really transform it into something beautiful for everyone involved. But you have to have the conversation. You have to be bold enough to say, "This is, this good mother said, this is the desire of my heart." And he desires it. He wants to serve, and he doesn't know how he could ever do it. And I have an uncle who had Down syndrome, and he lived well into his 70s. And all through his life, he spoke of the day that he would serve his mission. And the thing that breaks my heart is, at the time, with attitudes and just kind of the way things were, he was never given an opportunity to do so. Now, he was given some great opportunities. He was able to pass the sacrament and to kneel at the altar and say the prayers. And so there was inclusion. I don't want to paint, a picture that's inaccurate, but he still had that yearning to serve as a missionary. And that went unfulfilled. And it just breaks my heart, because I think surely there's something he could have done. But those things don't happen unless we have the conversations.
I love that. Okay,
I
Rabbi
really
Spector.
Yeah, I'm just going to really quickly piggyback on what both Bishop and Carol said. Talking to your faith leader, I will tell you though, like, I'll just be real and honest and blunt, because that's the type of person I am. I work 80-hour weeks on average. That is my average work week, is 80 hours a week, sometimes more, sometimes a little less. And so, honestly, often, sometimes when people approach me and say, "Hey, I have this issue or something, or can you help my," kind of what goes through my mind is like, "Oh no, I how am I going to do that when I'm spread so thin?" But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have that conversation. You absolutely should. I'm not trying to discourage you. But what I would say is, there might be other people who are in the same boat as you, who don't have the courage to come. And so if one person comes to me and says, "Hey, will you create this whole thing for my kid?" I of course want to help their kid and try and find something, but I'm going to say, like, gosh, I don't have a whole lot of time to devote to this one child. But if a bunch of people are coming and saying, "This is a problem in our community and we need your help, can you help us?" Then I'm going to go, "Oh, this is a large segment of my community, and that has this need." And so really do, like, what Carol and Bishop Weaver said, go and talk to your faith leader. Absolutely. And in the case that Bishop Weaver mentioned of this child with the missionary, maybe your faith leader can find a great solution, or like I said with this bat mitzvah student of mine. But if there's like something where you want radical change for the institution and a certain program, if you find other people and say, "This is a need in our community, not just an individual need," that's really powerful. A very quick example I'll give of that is when I was a rabbi in Los Angeles, somebody came up to me and my clergy team and said, "My child has autism and often makes noises during services or moves around, has arm flapping, and I don't feel comfortable coming to services because people look at us and stare. And even if they understand, they still stare. And I feel uncomfortable. And we were like, oh, I don't really know what to do for you. I mean, just know that you're always welcome, always included. And what this person did was find about 20 other families in the area who were Jewish, who had this same thing, and said, we would love to have a space for us. Now that it's 20 families who are coming to us, and it's not just, let's create something to help this one person, but this is a real need in our community. We created every other week a special service for anyone to come to before our usual Friday night service, that where we had worked with an interior designer to create sensory friendly colors on a wall, where we rolled out mats for people to roll around and play on, where we brought drums out and tambourines and maracas. And we said, this is a service we're going to do all of our same prayers and same blessings that we always do. And the rabbi will tell a kid-friendly story and everything. And everybody is welcome to come, and you are welcome and encouraged to move around, to dance, and to make as much music as you can. And before we knew it, we had 40, 50 people coming every week, and folks from special needs community and disability communities coming. And it became something that our synagogue became known for, where people started joining our synagogue because that was the place that was welcoming of people with disabilities and had a special service where they were leaders and included in making the music and stuff. Now, some people didn't like that. They said, I don't want a separate service or something. I said, everybody's welcome in every service, but this is a service where you can feel comfortable. And that only came as a result of a collective group of people saying, we have a real lacking as a whole in our community. Do something about it.
Love that. Thanks for that example. Thanks for all these great examples. All right. We are getting close to the end of our time. I think we've addressed most of the questions in the chat box. Julia, have you noticed any that we haven't picked up on? And Carol, thanks for stepping back and answering some of the ones that were listed earlier.
There is a question about liability.
Oh, yes.
That was asked earlier.
Yeah, so she was trying, I read that too and I forgot. So her question was, if you're working with a youth, a child that might be a runner or, might draw some concerns, where you as a teacher might need to go get and restrain to keep them safe and to bring them back. How do you keep from crossing that line of doing something that you shouldn't, but at the same time keeping the child safe?
Yeah, so this is actually a major issue with my current assignment, in seminaries, because we have runners, we have biters, we have the whole range, and really our approach is one of, if we can accommodate, we will accommodate. So on our faculty, our staff, we make it a point to make sure that we receive training that's appropriate. So right now we use a program called MANT training that talks about how to de-escalate, how to, with the least amount of intervention possible, how to help someone who might be escalated or, going through a difficult time or having an outburst or expressing anger. So we try to prepare ourselves to be able to handle those situations appropriately so that we can reasonably and with a reasonable expectation that nothing terrible is going to happen, that we can gather and participate together. However, I will say that there are certain things that we just can't do. I had to turn a student away. Mom was asking us if I could clear his airway every 20 minutes, because if you didn't clear his airway through suction, then he would start to lose, the oxygen count. And I'm saying to myself, I don't have that training. I don't have that expertise. What you really are looking for is a nurse or someone who's trained who can provide that, provide that service. And I don't have anyone on staff that has those credentials or has that capacity. Now, if you know someone, or if, we can have the conversation and we can try to find a solution, but there are situations where if physical safety is an issue, then we need to fall to the side of physical safety for all involved, for the student, for the teachers, for the aides, for staff. We just have to be reasonable in our expectations as to what we can do to be supportive. And circumstances change. We had a student that we physically, he to be blunt, he's built like an NFL linebacker, and he liked to throw his weight around. And the teacher we had in the class was this sweet, diminutive woman, and she was kind of all by herself. And the aides in class were elderly volunteers, and he had already started a pattern of pushing people, and it was, getting a little bit dicey. So for a period, we said, we can't make sure that your son and that we and the other students can be safe in this environment. The next year, a new teacher came in. He also happened to be built like a linebacker, and he had the training, and very quickly they were able to establish this rapport and mutual respect, and those behaviors subsided immediately, and now he's participating and having a good experience. So I guess what I'm driving at is liability is important. It is very real, but there are solutions. And what may be the case today may not be the case next week. Some variable could change that would alter the circumstance to allow, greater participation.
Well, and kind of to build on that too, is I think that, again, the conversation between the teacher, the leader, and the parent, and keeping that conversation going is one of the most important things. So that the parent, if the parent really wants that student in that class, then if the teacher or the leader, whoever, has that open conversation as far as, he's a runner, so if you're comfortable with me needing to, restrain him, grab him to bring him back, or team, have a team teacher, someone that might be sitting with that child that may have the behaviors, the needing that extra attention.
I've learned that if you put a student in a beanbag chair rather than a desk, that buys you about 3/4 of a second. So for the runner, you have some reaction time and can kind of head them off at the pass. So there are some simple things you can do to kind of give yourself a little bit of an edge to make sure people are going to be safe.
I like that. Thank you. All right. Julia, have you seen anything else that we gone through that?
Question, and I thought I saw Carol unmute for just a second. Did you want to add something, Carol?
I was just going to add that in the Catholic religious education classes, we have a national policy of 2 teachers always at minimum. They're always volunteers and they're always looking for more. I will always say that.
Yes.
But what I would also say is that if your child is a runner or a biter or kicker or whatever, part of, and I'm an old teacher, I taught for 22 years, you guys, being in the right environment where other children are modeling better behavior is always a good thing. But I also would say, what works at school, bring it to that teacher, bring it to that religious educator, so that if there's a plan in place, a behavior plan in place that's working in another environment, try to make it apply in a religious education environment too. And sometimes it is about, Mom, can you stick around? And maybe you're not in that classroom with that child. Maybe you're a volunteer in the next classroom, because we know sometimes kids won't behave if their mom's around, right? They'll just continue to be bad. So, being nearby, someone you could come in an emergency, come when there's a crisis. To me, it's about working together. Again, this relationship of having this conversation And we want all children to be safe. We want everyone to be safe. So how do we make that work? That's all I was going to add. So
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, and parents sometimes don't understand this, is if your child is participating in a religious education setting, sometimes there's the assumption that there's crosstalk between public ed and religious ed, and it's forbidden by law. They can't. So in our case, we've developed a release form that if a parent is willing to sign the release form, then we can have open communication with the school. We can be privy to the IEP and be supportive of those goals. We can, any student who has a seizure plan, I absolutely have to know what that is. Or if they have severe allergies, I've got to know what that is. And so there are ways that you can have that collaboration. The trick is you need to make sure you cross the T's and dot the I's, because school personnel, they will jeopardize their job if they share information without that permission. And on our side, we can't solicit. We can't say, well, tell me about Tim. It's just not appropriate. So as a parent, you need to make sure that somehow you're bridging that gap, whether you're providing the information directly or whether you're giving permission for the communication to happen or something. But again, that knowledge is just power, and it allows us to serve so much more effectively and to ensure that safety is maintained and that we can care for your child. We have students who are medically fragile that participate, but the reason they can participate is because I do know the seizure plan, and I do know, what works and what doesn't work. I know the triggers, and so we can absolutely include and involve and participate. But without that information, it gets kind of dicey.
Well, one of the comments in the chat box was to like, if you're just like Carol said, and you have said as well, if your child has a safety plan, a behavior intervention plan, tools that have worked. I love that. Tools that have worked at school can be brought into the religious setting, because oftentimes I get, well, what do you do? What would you recommend? And I'm like, well, what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for you. And right, if I sit with her, her behaviors are going to increase because she doesn't want me there, and so, right, they don't often behave better for parents in those settings because they don't want to be with their parents. They want to be with their peers. Well, this has been amazing. I think this has turned out beyond our expectations. If anybody in the participating in the audience, I guess, if you have any last questions or comments that you would like to share, please put them in the chat box. Real quick, we are funded by grants, and with those, they asked us to collect a little information from our workshops and panels that we do. And so I'm going to open a poll real quick and ask that you as participants, if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes, I think there's 6 questions, just to hurry, not even take a couple of minutes, it'll take you 30 seconds to go through and fill that. That would just be super and so helpful for us. But while the participants are doing that, I'll just read a couple of comments. Excuse me. I really enjoyed this. It was so enlightening, so many good ideas. Another parent, this was fantastic. Thank you, faith leaders, for coming and sharing. And another, this was so amazing. Thanks to all of the panelists for being here. It has been very enlightening and I think empowering, because it's always nice as a parent to hear from the other side, kind of like at school, you as a parent like to hear what the education team has to share most of the time. Sometimes in IEP meetings, it doesn't go as smoothly as we wanted, but it's always nice to hear what leaders want, what information they feel would be beneficial from the parents, and that it's okay for us to advocate. It's okay for us to continue to share information because education information is empowering on either side of the fence. And so I think that is just, that's a wonderful takeaway for me. Any last thoughts from our panelists?
So I have an interesting idea if you guys are open. And it may take a little help from Rabbi if you're okay with it. So one thing, since this is faith and disability, I'd love to kind of end with a blessing from a scripture we all recognize and see if Rabbi would follow me with the Hebrew of the Aaronic blessing.
Okay, yes, absolutely. We call
Would
it a
you guys
priestly
be okay with
blessing.
sharing that? This comes from the Bible, from the book of Numbers. And I just invite everyone, because the reality is, to you guys as parents, you have real spiritual needs too. And so our heart is yes, to love your kids, to love everybody, but also to minister to you as well. So however you want to, whatever power you want to lift up, my prayer is as the blessing says, the Lord bless you and keep you. Lord, cause his face to shine upon you, be gracious to you. Lord, turn his countenance towards you and give you peace.
Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yaher Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Thank you.
That was needed. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you very much for following that prompting to share. Appreciate it. And as I agree, as one of the best pieces of advice that I received as a parent was to take care of myself so that I can take care of my daughter. So thank you. Oh, that was perfect ending. There's so many comments that say that. Well, thank you again so very much to our panelists, Carol Ruddell, John Weaver, Austin Porter, and Rabbi Sam Spector. We so appreciate your time. This was fabulous and worth the wait. Hopefully you feel the same, that it was worth the wait for all of us. Absolutely beautiful. For all of you who registered, which everyone on here has, the link will be sent directly to you, and then it will also be posted on our Parent Center website. Not quite sure where, but so yeah, so you are more than welcome to share this with families, with other faith leaders, with your own faith leaders as you work with them and your child. I think that this has provided such great information, amazing tools for everyone to use, really. This is fabulous. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone be well, be safe.
Up the mess when you come to us. Bring the mess, because we have our own too. And that is a really amazing way to even, those conversations where there may even be a bump and grind and be some, real deep emotion, because the reality is when you're advocating for your child or your family, that's a beautiful thing. And even if that initial conversation may spark some emotion or some advocacy, mama bear comes out, papa bear comes out, don't let that stop you. Bring the mess to us, because we're also bringing the mess that we carry. And I'd also say, if you know that about yourself, it's just helpful for us, even if you say, hey, this is going to be a hard conversation for me, and kind of couch it and just say, I know this about, when I advocate for my family, it does get me heated. And even that little understanding is great for us. And maybe you're not able to have that conversation face to face. We all know about that through the last year. And certain situations may come up where you need to send an email, or you need to send a text. And two things you could do is write it and wait, sit on it 24 hours. And then
sitting on it is a really good idea.
Yeah.
Or similarly, like what Carol said, maybe you have a friend who either knows a faith leader or doesn't, but they can kind of read that communication with you and say, you know what, this needs to be said, and maybe this could be said a different way. But the biggest thing is never let the fear of being, emotional about advocating for your needs stop you from coming. Please don't.
If I can just echo Austin's comments here. You spoke beautifully what was in my heart and what I was thinking at the very moment. Please don't divorce yourself of the emotion. Number one, it's impossible. And number two, I'm not even sure that would be appropriate, because you do have strong feelings. You are advocating for a dearly loved one. And one of the things that can be really helpful in these conversations, this is just a little technique. Make sure your conversation is couched in I language rather than you language.
Mhm.
This you language always comes across as accusatory. And I language is where you're disclosing your heart. You're sharing your innermost feelings, and you have that vulnerability. And I promise you that vulnerability will be honored and respected with any faith leader worth their salt. Okay. When someone comes and says, my heart is aching because I can't provide this experience for my child, or I don't know how to do this, or I want so badly for him or her to experience this, or to feel these things, then immediately you're going to tap in to that, I want to say, that real conversation. There's a business level, a transactional conversation that doesn't work in these settings. If it's purely transactional, then it's missing its heart.
Mhm.
And it has to come to that level of the heart, but doing so from an expression of your true feelings and desires and understanding is so important. And that's where taking time to make sure you're clear as to what those things are. Because I can't tell you how many times I've spoken, to my wife or my kids, and emotion was forefront, and it never works. It always backfires. It's those moments you go back and apologize for later, right? So having that clarity of where you are and what your understanding is and what your desires are will really smooth the way, and it will open up the genuine conversation that needs to happen.
So true. I sent an email to a teacher of my typical daughter, is actually her basketball coach at